Hello, welcome back. This is the third installment in our video series on ancient Greek art and architecture. And for this installment, we're looking at the classical, what's also called the Hellenic, and the Hellenistic age of Greece. The classical period is sort of what we think of when we think of ancient Greece, the time of the forums and the philosophy and all those sorts of things we think of when we think of Greece. This is that time period. So a big part of Greek life were the festivals, and at these festivals, often they were harvest festivals, spring and fall. A large part of it were competing dramatists, so they put on plays, they'd compete to win prizes. And there are still a number of Greek theaters left in Greece, and they would have been built usually on a hillside. You can see they're curved around, pretty similar to what we have today. It was a good form, we still use it. So people would sit, well, excuse me, men would sit, women really weren't allowed out in public, in the stands here. Down here is where the chorus would stand. The chorus was sort of like the singing, dancing part of the play, and they also sort of acted as like the mediators between the audience and the characters. So drama a little different than what we know of today. Up front here is where the actors would have been, and there wouldn't have been very many on stage at a time. You don't have big scenes with lots of people. And behind them would have been a permanent wall called a skene, what we call today our scene, our backdrop, but that wouldn't have been changed for the most part. There were several doors where characters could come in and out, and most violent things sort of took place off stage, and then somebody would run on the stage and tell us about it. So there wasn't much at this particular time in the way of a background. So this is looking straight on. Here's the skene, and then the people, of course, would have been, the actors would have been along there, the orchestra, the theater, and this is how people came on and off, right? So we don't do a lot with theater this particular semester, but the architecture is important to understand. You can see quite a difference between now the sculpture of the earlier period, the Archaic period, to now. We didn't see a lot of movement in the earlier sculptures. They were really static. And now our figures are much more dynamic. That means they're in a sense of movement, or incipient movement. In other words, they're getting ready to do something. So in this disco thrower, excuse me, not disco, discus thrower, and most people are kind of familiar with this statue. He's getting ready, this athlete, to throw it. He hasn't thrown it yet, but he's getting ready to. And we can see his muscles tensed up, and they look very lifelike. This was kind of at the height of the sculpture. We also have a kind of new stance. You kind of see how it's curved, right? The person who began this, or at least gets credit for it, goes by the name of Praxiteles. So we call this the Praxiteles S-curve. He's kind of swooping, and we still have that contrapposto with the foot standing out in front of us. This is the god Dionysus with the god Hermes as a child, but that's what we call that stance. That kind of swooping S shape is Praxiteles S-curve. Also, we began working in bronze. This is one of the earlier bronze castings, he was like 6 feet tall, this bronze casting. And if I remember correctly, it was found at the bottom of maybe the Mediterranean. It looked like the piece was being taken somewhere else. It was being transported, and when the ship sunk, it went down with it. But you can see what great care it has been taken with making his hair and his beard look so accurate. And again, as I mentioned before, he would have had stones or something in the eyes, which would have made him look really realistic. It's so lifelike. This is a porch of a temple, and instead of columns, you might remember this from our column lecture at the very beginning of the semester, instead of columns holding up the porch here, we have caryatids. That's a full woman here, holding up the column, acting as columns, holding up the roof of this porch. They're called caryatids. You see this big focus on drapery. This become even more intense in the Hellenistic period, and then that all goes away, and we don't see it again for quite a while. So we'll see as the Middle Ages comes in how this all goes away, and then it slowly has to come back again. That's one of the things you'll notice is the clothing on people and the attention to detail and the draperies.